Bill, you could begin whenever you're ready.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Marie. And hello, everyone, and welcome to Learning from Home. And welcome to the library's presentation called Tennessee Williams Small Craft Warnings. My name is Dr. Bill THIERFELDER, and I'll be your host today. For those of you who don't know me, I'm a retired professor of arts and humanities and a docent emeritus from the American Museum of Natural History. I live in Portland, Oregon, which is where I'm speaking to you from today, and where I am an artist, a writer, and a lecturer. I also regularly return to New York, where I continue my work at the museum and enjoy the wonders of the Big Apple. Now, since we can't cover everything about excuse me, about today's topic in one presentation, I invite you to take a deeper dive on my website, which is makingwings.net. And you're going to take deeper dive number 79. Now, for those of you who aren't regulars, let me explain. So it's making wings, one word. And if you go there, okay, you should be seeing now on your screen, making wings. If you go into the upper right corner and click on that little, what's called a hamburger menu, you're going to have a big drop down. Please feel free to visit any of these, but what you want is deeper dives. Click on that little downward arrow. And again, lots and lots of different programs. These are programs that I've already given or will be giving in the future. Please feel free to visit any of them. But for today's purposes, you want to go to 79, Tennessee Williams. And what you're going to find on that page is an overview of his life, some recommended media. Now, I'm going to be talking about some of these books and DVDs during the program. If you don't have a paper and pencil handy, they're available here. You can copy down authors and titles. I have print resources, video resources, and then we are going to be visiting many of his major works today. And I have given on the website some web resources for each of the ones that we might be talking about today. And then we have a selected bibliography. These are all the different things that he wrote over a very long and productive career. And again, with these, let's say you wanted to look up a biography with these print resources, for example, just click on the one you want. In this case, I'll pick on Wikipedia. You will be brought to the Wikipedia biography of Tennessee Williams. And when you're done with it, all you have to do is click it off and you're back on my page. So that's really great. It's one stop shopping for you. So please take advantage of that. So again, it's makingwings.net, deeper dive 79. By the way, the painting on your screen is by the famous American artist Thomas Hart Benton. It's called Poker Night from 1948. And it is his interpretation of a scene from A Streetcar Named Desire. Now, everything that you're going to hear in the program today um, uses the web resources and the books that you saw on my website. But for this presentation, I especially used the following sources to build its structure and its script. Wikipedia, Britannica, the Biography Channel, and the PBS series American Masters. Now, one of the things that you did see on the website was suggested media. And here are three approaches to learn about his life. The Biography Channel's 50-minute documentary about Williams called Wounded Genius. It's an excellent overview You can stream it, and many libraries have copies of it. John Lahr's biography is an excellent overview, and it's called Mad Pilgrimage of the Flesh, and it's considered by many to be the definitive biography of the playwright. And by the way, Lahr is the son of the Hollywood icon, Burt Lahr. This is his son. And finally, we have Lyle Leverich's Tom. It's a superb introduction to Williams's early life, the life before he became world famous in the 1950s. So what are we going to do today? We're first going to do a quick tour of highlights of William's life, and then we're going to focus on 17 specific works or genres. In addition to writing stage plays, not to mention a few notable screenplays for Hollywood, Williams was also an extremely talented short story writer, a very competent poet, and the author of a very fine novel. So with that understanding, what we're doing today, let's begin. So on March the 26th of 1911, Thomas Lanier Williams was born in Columbus, Mississippi. He was the second child of Cornelius Williams and Edwina Dakin Williams, both descendants of very well-to-do Southern families. You see an image of Cornelius in the upper left, walking with little Tom. The central background photo that you see shows Edwina, the mom, with Tom on the right, and his older sister, Rose, on the left. She's going to prove very important in our story today. Now, the background photo here shows William's home in Columbus, Mississippi, where Tom contracted diphtheria at the age of 5 in the year 1916. He nearly died, and his legs remained nearly paralyzed for close to 2 years before he fully recovered. After that recovery, in 1918, the Williams family moved into an apartment building, the one you see on your screen, in St. Louis, Missouri. A year later, Cornelius and Edwina's third and last child was born, a boy named Dakin, named after the mother's side of the family. Now, as I say, you see the building on your screen, and on your left, you see little Dakin and Tom in the 1970s. Now, don't be deceived by the laughter. The brothers had a very strained relationship in later years, as we're going to see in a few minutes. I always look at this picture. That's a grimace with full teeth, and that's a laugh. Trust me, that's the relationship. Meanwhile, going back to our chronology here, 1927, the 16-year-old Williams entered a writing contest held by Smart Set magazine and ended up winning third place and a prize of $5 for his essay, Can a Good Wife Be a Good Sport? Now, this short piece ended up being his very first entry into the literary world. It's considered his first published piece. Well, after studying at Solden High School and then University City High School, in 1929, Tom was admitted to the University of Missouri, where he saw a production of Heinrich Ibsen's great play, Ghosts. The play bowled him over, and he decided to become a playwright. Well, it turned out that the University of Missouri would be the first of 3 colleges he attended in his university career. He wasn't an exceptional student, and he often struggled to fit in. But it was in college that he was given the nickname Tennessee, which was his father's home state. He was named for Tennessee because of his thick Southern drawl. Now, that's always remained a bit of a mystery to me. Why wasn't he nicknamed Missouri or Mississippi, states where he eventually did live, or New York? but he was named after his father's home state, Tennessee. So another one of those little quirks. But anyway, Tennessee became his nickname. Now, in 1931, at his father's insistence, Williams withdrew from university after failing out of a military training course and took a job at the Universal Shoe Company, his father's employer. He hated the job almost immediately, and it drove the 20-year-old to write prodigiously. He dove into writing as a way of escaping the drudgery of this job. Williams often worked on his stories and plays on weekends and late into the night. In fact, his mother, Edwina, recalled his intensity. Tom would go to his room with black coffee and cigarettes, and I would hear the typewriter clicking away at night in the silent house. Some mornings when I walked in to wake him for work, I would find him sprawled, fully dressed across the bed, too tired to remove his clothes. Well, he ended up working for that shoe company for about 6 years. Now, during that time, Williams did enroll at Washington University in St. Louis, but then dropped out again. But meanwhile, back at the shoe factory, he met a young man named Stanley Kowalski, who would, of course, later resurface as a character in A Streetcar Named Desire. So there actually was a real Stanley Kowalski. I don't know if he screamed Stella in the middle of the night, but there was a Stanley Kowalski. Finally, number 3, Williams enrolled at the University of Iowa in 1937. And during his time there, he made his dramatic debut with the production of his short play, Cairo, Shanghai, Bombay, in Memphis, Tennessee. It was co-written, by the way, with a friend of his, Bernice Shapiro. I've done some research on this, and I really don't find anything about her after her college career. So don't know. But if you look over here at the front page there, you can see Bernice Dorothy Shapiro. And he does still hear Tom Williams, even though his nickname by that point was Tennessee. He was still signing things as Tom. Well, he followed up this first play with Candles to the Sun and The Fugitive Kind, both produced by the Mummers of St. Louis, and both plays that he would later rework later on in his career, right? But 1937 becomes pivotal for another reason, and a reason that would haunt Williams for the rest of his life. Williams' older sister, Rose, was hospitalized for schizophrenia. Williams was deeply attached to her, and in many ways, her mental and physical frailties would inspire some of his greatest stage characters. Ironically, she would end up outliving Williams by over 13 years. But there's that picture of her there over on the right, a very lovely young lady. In 1938, Williams graduated from the University of Iowa. So third time was a charm, third university. He finally gets his Bachelor of Arts degree. And soon after, he moved to New Orleans. And you see his first apartment on Toulouse Street on your left. In many ways, New Orleans would become his home base for the rest of his life. It was the Big Easy that Williams officially adopted. It was there in the Big Easy that he officially adopted that college nickname of Tennessee as his pen name. Now, to support his playwriting, Williams applied for a grant, and he got it, $1,000 Rockefeller grant, and he also got a $100 prize from the group theater. So this was a guy from the very beginning. He was a go-getter. He had the energy. He wasn't just the artist sitting in the garret writing a play. He also put in a lot of the important legwork. And for any of you who've tried to write a grant, you know that is not necessarily an easy process. Well, if the Crescent City was where Williams' heart beat most fondly, It was New York City where he found a second home base. Indeed, in 1939, Williams moved to New York and spent most of the next year supporting himself with odd jobs such as bellhop, elevator operator, and even a movie usher. On your screen, in the lower center of your screen there, you see one of the many apartments that Williams lived in over the years. And in fact, he even died in a hotel in New York. So, New York was, other than New Orleans, was certainly a big place. Um, and he did a lot of vacationing up in Provincetown, Massachusetts, and also in Key West. So those were other places, but it was really New Orleans and New York. Those were his his center of action. Well, all of that brings us to 1940, a truly watershed moment in Williams' life. His play Battle of Angels was produced by the Theater Guild in Boston, Massachusetts. It was his first commercially produced play. The other plays were, private groups, amateur groups, college groups. This is a major theater group in Boston, and it was his first commercially produced play. Margaret Webster directed, while Hollywood actress Miriam Hopkins played the leading woman role of Myrna, and Wesley Addy was cast as the leading man, Val. Well, the debut was far from auspicious. In the last act, a general store is supposed to burn down. Well, during the first performance, that burning got out of control, filling the theater with smoke and causing the audience to head for the exits. And the reviews for the play were probably just as bad. They were poor. And the play was criticized as immoral and vulgar. I mean, we're talking, banned in Boston here. Um, Production closed after 2 weeks, with Williams told to rewrite his play. Now, ironically, he did, and it reappeared as the play Orpheus Descending in 1957, a couple decades later. And interestingly enough, it was a similar major flop. Today it's been reconsidered as a major play by Williams, but its first time as Battle of Angels and its second time as Orpheus Descending bombed. But yet, this first taste of commercial theater became the spark that fired the rest of his career. Despite the failure, he did not give up. This guy was a fighter. You know, he was a fighter. And then comes 1943. In an attempt to cure her daughter's schizophrenia, the mother, Edwina, volunteered Rose for one of the first lobotomies performed in the United States, and apparently with the father Cornelius's consent. As a result of the operation, Rose remained stuck in a permanent state of semi-consciousness. Williams resented his parents for the rest of his life for allowing her to have the experimental operation. And I've just popped up on your screen there over here on the left. You can see her in later years with Williams. And as I said, the irony is that she outlives him by 13 years. Now, during this same period, the mid 1940s, Williams took a job as a screenwriter for MGM Studios in Los Angeles. They rejected a script that he produced, but they did give him the rights to use the work as he pleased. Well, guess what? He did. And he adapted that screenplay that MGM rejected into a little play that he called Glass Menagerie. Well, indeed, a year after the rejection from MGM, the Glass Menagerie premiered at the Lyric Theater in Chicago, and it enjoyed a very successful run. So successful, in fact, that Menagerie moved to the Playhouse Theater on Broadway, earning Williams the New York Drama Critics Circle Award for Best Play of the Season. Now, we'll be talking more about some of Williams' greatest hits later in the program. So we'll put a little bookmark here. Well, Then comes 1947. On December the 3rd, A Streetcar Named Desire opened on Broadway to rave reviews. The production starred Marlon Brando as Stanley Kowalski and Jessica Tandy as fluttery, fragile Blanche Dubois. The play earned Williams a Pulitzer Prize and turned him into one of the superstars of the theater world. Now, here we're in the 1940s now, late 1940s. I'm going to pause for a short sidebar. And let's talk about Tennessee's love life. The great love of his life was Frank Merlo, whom he met in Provincetown, Massachusetts in 1948. But there were literally hundreds of others. There was always a lot of sex. One-night stands were not unusual. In fact, nights with hustlers were often the norm. It was life lived to the fullest. It was also a search to combat the loneliness that often haunted him. A quote from an interview conducted in his later life sums things up. Don't worry about when or why someone loves you. Just take the love, husband it, return it. Good arrives and we kick its tires and wonder if a better model is around the corner. Take the good whenever it comes and from any quarter. Good is in startlingly short supply. Well, there were also some longer-lived relationships, ones that lasted more than an evening of booze and sex. Highlights of those include, and we'll start there with in the upper left corner, Kip Kiernan, who was Tennessee's first great love, the novelist Donald Wyndham underneath, the handsome Mexican-American muse Pancho Rodriguez. See them. I'm now going across the bottom row. He was he was a young secretary. Then you have Robert Carroll, who was his last lover and was a writer. Now, the common characteristics of all of these was the age factor. Tennessee was always the older man. And in the case of Robert Carroll, it was 40 years older. But in the midst of all of these romances, there was Frank Merlo. He was the one constant. Frank was, Williams was a moth and Merlo was the light, and Williams constantly came back to him. Frank was a working class Italian American from New Jersey. He worked as an actor on occasion, but was primarily Williams' personal assistant. In 1951, Williams wrote a play inspired by Merlo called The Rose Tattoo, which was, he called it his love play. It even has a dedication that reads, to Frankie in return for Sicily. Frank's relatives were from Sicily, and he took Tennessee there on a vacation. So that's what that dedication is, to Frankie in return for Sicily. Now, according to his memoirs, Williams said that living with Merlo in his Manhattan apartment and in his, I guess you could call it vacation home in Key West, were some of his happiest and most productive years. But Williams was heavily involved with alcohol and various drugs. This, combined with Williams' promiscuity, put a strain on their relationship and, of course, eventually on Williams' writing. Then, in 1962, Merlo was diagnosed with lung cancer. And as his health declined, and to Williams' credit, Williams remained by his side and actually housed Merlo in his apartment, Tennessee's apartment in Manhattan. He basically played nurse for a year. Later, that cancer was deemed inoperable and Merlo died in 1963. Merlo's last words to Williams were, I'm used to you now, which Williams actually accepted as an admission of Merlo's love, despite the fact that Williams wasn't the constant lover. Okay, let's get back to the chronology. That was a little about the love life. In 1948, the year he met Merlot, Williams published his first book of short stories called One Arm. The 11 stories established Williams as a short story writer of the same stature that he had shown as a dramatist. In the title story, we live through the main character's last hours and memories with a rough trade ex prize fighter who is awaiting execution for murder. Portrait of a Girl in Glass is a luminous and nostalgic recollection of characters who figure in the Glass Menagerie. So Williams, creates a stage play, but he also writes a short story. Excuse me, a screenplay. I meant he writes a screenplay about the Glass Menagerie. Then he writes a short story about it, and then he finally makes it into a play. So the story is Portrait of a Girl in Glass. I recommend it. It's kind of fun to read an earlier version of the story. Another tale, The Yellow Bird, became well known because the author recorded a reading of it. It tells of a minister's daughter who finds a particularly violent but satisfactory way of expunging a load of inherited Puritan guilt. It's truly a remarkable collection. Well, the success of Streetcar led to Summer and Smoke in 1948, which opened to favorable reviews at the Music Box Theater on Broadway. By now, it was obvious that Williams wrote brilliantly for his female leads, many of whom were inspired by that Sister Rose. Yet he was like an opera composer who knew how to write a great aria for the diva or the poignant soliloquy for the fragile ingenue. And along those lines, in 1950, Williams published his first novel, The Roman Spring of Mrs. Stone. It was acclaimed by the American writer Gore Vidal as splendidly written, precise, short, complete, and fine. It tells the story of a wealthy 50-ish American widow, recently a famous stage beauty, who was now drifting and definitely open to experiencing love. This, of course, becomes one of the common tropes of all of Williams' writing. The older, once beautiful, woman who's seeking love, and again, partially, I think, inspired by the Sister Rose, but also perhaps by his own life. Constantly looking for ways to overcome loneliness. Following year, 1951, The Rose Tattoo opened at the Martin Beck Theater on Broadway, and it earned Williams a Tony Award for the best play. The show ran for over 300 performances and starred Maureen Stapleton, Phyllis Love, and Eli Wallach. The same year, the film version of A Streetcar Named Desire premiered, starring all of the original Broadway cast members except for Jessica Tandy, who was replaced brilliantly by the actress Vivien Leigh. The movie was a major hit and earned Academy Awards for all of the main actors except Marlon Brando. Here's a little bit of movie trivia. Brando lost out to Humphrey Bogart, who had triumphed with Katharine Hepburn in The African Queen. In 1953, Williams' strange, nightmarish play Camino Real opened at the National Theater on Broadway. Some people got it, but it left others cold. It ran for a scant 60 performances and remains one of Williams's least performed plays from his so-called golden years. Well, if Camino Real left some people cold, Williams's next Broadway show certainly did not. On March 24th of 1955, Cat on a Hot Tin Roof opened to raves at the Morosco Theater on Broadway, earning Williams his second Pulitzer Prize, as well as another Tony Award for Best Play. Now, we're going to be talking more about some of these works in a little bit. I'm just now giving you kind of this timeline of his life. The following year, in 56, Williams wrote the screenplay for Baby Doll, a movie about an underage bride whose husband has promised her father that she will remain a virgin until the age of 20. Time magazine called it, quote, just possibly the dirtiest American made movie picture that has ever been legally made. Okay. Now, of course, despite the moral objections, Baby Doll enjoyed favorable responses from most critics and earned numerous accolades, including the Golden Globe Award for Best Director for Elia Kazan and nomination for 4 other Golden Globe Awards, 4 Academy Awards, and 4 BAFTA Awards. In other words, tell me something is dirty and everybody will want to see it. But I love that Time magazine, right? Just possibly the dirtiest American made motion picture that has ever been legally exhibited. Now, once again, showing his versatility, in 1956, Williams produced his first collection of poetry in The Winter of Cities. The poems are rich in imagery and are illuminated by the psychological intuition that we know so well from Williams' shorter plays. Now, we've already alluded to this a little bit. Williams' play Orpheus Descending, which was that rewrite of that first play, Battle of Angels, opened on Broadway and ran for just 68 performances. Williams fell into a depression following the play's poor reviews and underwent psychoanalysis. And it was during psychoanalysis, after starting therapy, that he wrote the 1-act play Suddenly Last Summer, about a woman who goes insane after witnessing her gay cousin's brutal murder. That play would receive life in a film version with Katharine Hepburn, Elizabeth Taylor, and Montgomery Clift in 1959. Again, we'll talk more about that in a bit. By the way, Orpheus Descending, now retitled The Fugitive Kind, also received a film adaptation in 1959 starring Marlon Brando and Anna Magnani, and like the stage play, it bombed at the box office. So Battle of Angels, Orpheus Descending, Fugitive Kind, he just should have given up on that one because 3 strikes, he was out. Now, Sweet Bird of Youth fared much, much better when it opened on Broadway in 1959 at the Martin Beck Theater. And the success that it did have, many people feel, was owed in great part to the absolutely electric performance of Paul Newman, whom you see here in the original playbill and in some pictures here. Williams next tried his hand at a domestic comedy called Period of Adjustment, which opened to mixed reviews in 1960. Now, it would later get a film treatment with Jane Fonda and Jim Hutton, but let's just say that Williams wasn't Neil Simon. The Night of the Iguana opened at the Royale Theater on Broadway in 1961, earning Williams another Tony Award for Best Play. The play, starring Bette Davis and Patrick O'Neill, like the film version with Richard Burton and Ava Gardner in 1964, well, they turned out to be Williams' last great critical successes for almost a decade. Now, on January the 16th of 1963, The Milk Train Doesn't Stop Here Anymore opened at the Morosco Theater on Broadway. It closed after 69 performances. And the 1964 rewrite with Tallulah Bankhead and Tab Hunter, you see them in the over here, did even worse. That only managed 5 performances. Now, to add to the misery of 1963, again, we've already spoken of this, his most consistent partner, Frank Merlo, died of lung cancer at the age of 40, and it sent Williams into a deep depression that lasted for close to a decade. And it didn't help that the poor reviews kept coming. In 1968, The 7 Descents of Myrtle opened at the Ethel Barrymore Theater on Broadway, and it was a critical bomb and closed after barely 24 performances. And this play marked a streak of several poorly received plays that would dominate Williams's late career. By the way, what's interesting is you're looking on the screen here, there's a little bit of a sneak preview. All of these plays that bombed in the 60s and 70s actually have ended up becoming quite successful. They've found a second life. That's what all the pictures you see, with the exception over here of the original playbill. All of these, this is from current productions. So it's interesting, right? A later reevaluation. Well, all of this, all of these failures really took their toll. And in 1969, Williams suffered what at that time was called a nervous breakdown. And his younger brother, Dakin, had him committed to a psychiatric ward in St. Barnes Hospital in St. Louis. You see that on your screen, where Williams remained for several months. Now, Williams was always bitter about this experience, and he never fully forgave Dakin. In fact, when Williams passed away in 1983, Tennessee left Dakin out of his will completely. Now, the one great exception to all the failures happened in 1972, when the play Small Craft Warnings opened off Broadway and ran for 200 performances. It was Williams' first commercial and critical success in a decade, but proved to be the last success of his career. Now, on your screen, you see the parade of Broadway failures. Outcry in 1973 ran for only 12 performances. Eccentricities of a Nightingale, Morosco Theater, 24 performances. Vieux Carré, that managed 6. Closed for a Summer Hotel, that closed after 14 performances. Interestingly enough, right, producers were still willing to mount expensive productions for the Broadway stage, but the critics and audiences were not kind. Interestingly, over 40 years later, scholars in regional theaters are re-examining these late plays and finding much to recommend. It's posthumous acclaim that would probably please Williams, because it's a vindication. You know, I can see him, you know, in The Great Beyond going, see, I told you I wrote a good play. You know, I was right. Well, in the midst of all these highly public failures, Williams published his tell-all autobiography titled simply Memoirs in 1975. It was an immediate bestseller and something of a cause célèbre. The book didn't revive his career, but it certainly gave it a very large whiff of oxygen. A second collection of intriguing poems called Androgyne Mon Amour was published in 1977. And as is the case with the earlier volume, there's much to appreciate. But neither the last plays, the memoir, or the poetry could undo the psychological mess that Williams was experiencing. As an addict who never found sobriety or true late life happiness, Williams died on February the 24th of 1983 in his New York City residence at the Hotel Elise. According to official reports, he choked to death on a bottle cap filled with barbiturates. He had requested that his body be buried in the Caribbean Sea, near where the American poet Hart Crane had drowned himself. However, his brother Dakin arranged for him to be buried at Calvary Cemetery in St. Louis, where his mother was buried. There's a little, I think, knife spin there by Dakin. Now, Williams, as you know, left Dakin out of the will, but he left his literary rights to the University of the South in Sewanee, Tennessee, an Episcopalian school in honor of his maternal grandfather, Walter Dakin, an alumnus of the university. The funds and royalties were still support, to this day, a creative writing program. When his sister Rose died 13 years later in 1996, after many years in a mental institution, through her family's end of life plans, Rose also bequeathed $7 million from her part of the Williams estate to the university. Not a drop for Dakin. Now, Williams was prolific and often maddeningly profligate. The man who wrote Streetcar and dozens of other plays also did drugs with hustlers and barely drew a sober breath in his last years. He lived in many ways the typical, stereotypical artist life. He was fast and he was furious. Now, but today, 2024, looking back at his abundant output in several literary genres, a number of achievements stand out. So that's what we're going to look at now. 17 works that have established Williams as one of the cornerstones of American literature. Now, we've already looked at most of these, but I'd like to say a bit more. Now, clearly, number one on our list is the drama, The Glass Menagerie. It changed how American plays looked and sounded. In this and other plays, Williams created a colorful cast of outcasts and escapists, characters who invent beautiful fantasy worlds in order to survive their difficult and sometimes ugly lives. Yet, despite their circumstances, they speak in beautiful, lyrical language. Williams once said, "I'm a poet, and then I put the poetry into the drama." Now, in this play and many subsequent dramas, Williams also used unconventional techniques, impressionistic lighting, stories told in flashback, unusual set designs, to get at what he said was a closer approach to the truth. The original production featured Laurette Taylor as Amanda, Eddie Dowling as Tom, Julie Hayden as Laura, and Anthony Ross as Jim. The production played for 563 performances before closing in August of 1946. Of course, the 1947 performances of Jessica Tandy and Marlon Brando on stage and those of Vivian Leigh and Brando in the 1951 film remain indelible. But there are other remarkable facets of A Streetcar Desire that make it quite remarkable. One of the main ways that Williams dramatizes Blanche Dubois' world of fantasy and her inability to overcome reality is through an exploration of the boundary between the exterior and the interior. The set of the play consists of the two-room Kowalski apartment and the street that surrounds it. Williams' use of this flexible set that allows the street to be seen at the same time as the interior of the home expresses the notion that home is not a domestic sanctuary. The realities of the outer world invade the inner world, and vice versa. The fantasy world of Blanche is shattered by the realities of the external world beyond the walls of the Kowalski apartment. The most notable instance of this effect occurs just before Stanley rapes Blanche, when the back wall of the apartment becomes transparent to show the struggles occurring on the street, as well as what's going on in the apartment, foreshadowing the violation that is about to take place in the Kowalski home. No one had created a play quite like it before. And like Menagerie, Streetcar changed the traditional way plays were presented on the stage. Summer and Smoke, set in the 1910s in Glorious Hill, Mississippi, the heart of Williams's homeland, is a really interesting drama. In it, a doctor named John Buchanan returns to take up his aging, unstable father's medical practice. He platonically romances Alma Weinmiller, but enjoys sexual encounters with Rosa Gonzalez at the Moon Lake Casino. The triangular affair represents Williams' clash between Old South, Alma says, we're a bit peculiar, and the New South. Is it so hard to forget you're a preacher's daughter? Asked John. Rosa, representing both the old and the new Mexico, seems a forbidden afterthought. Oh, cantinas are much more fun than saloons. Well, the wastrel reformed by love storyline might be a tiresome melodrama, but we don't really notice that when we're experiencing Williams's extraordinary style. The poetry of the language lifts the melodrama into poignant tragedy. The 1961 film version of the play, starring Lawrence Harvey and Geraldine Page, won Miss Page a Golden Globe Award, a National Board of Review Award, and an Oscar nomination, as well as numerous nominations for from several organizations for Elmer Bernstein's very beautiful score for the movie. Now, the Rose Tattoo, the one that was dedicated to Frank Merlo, this is Williams' most lighthearted play. It's an homage, many critics believe, not only to his Frank Merlo, but also to his sister Rose. In fact, he even includes her name, right, in the title, The Rose Tattoo, whom Williams deeply loved despite their numerous infidelities. Frank Merlo loved him despite those infidelities, and Rose kind of loved him unconditionally in her lobotomized state. Ultimately, this play is about humanity. It's about acceptance. It's about love. And it's really about our willingness to unmask ourselves. The play's fond treatment of its group of Sicilian American characters points to Williams' conviction that Anglo-American culture at the time, we're talking late 40s and 50s, was marred by racial and ethnic prejudice. Thus, the play's unsympathetic characters display a disparaging attitude toward the Sicilian immigrants that was consistent with the prejudices indicative of American reality. At the same time, other Americans welcomed the cultural contributions of Italian Americans. Indeed, Italy itself was a kind of experiencing a golden age in cinema, and many Italian actors were courted by Hollywood to star in US-made English language films. And one of those actors, Anna Magnani, was cast in the film version of The Rose Tattoo in 1955, a role for which she won the Academy Award. Now, on your screen, you see Marissa Tomei as Serafina in the remarkable 2019 revival at the Roundabout Theater in New York. And there are scenes from that production that you can actually stream. She's a powerhouse. She's such a wonderful actress. Now, Camino Real has always been a bit of a problem child because of its often strange blend of fantasy and reality. Here's some of what Brooke Atkinson said in his New York Times review the opening night. Looking into the corners of his heart, Tennessee Williams has written a strange and disturbing drama. Since Camino Real is a kind of cosmic fantasy, one must not interpret it literally. But to one theater goer, that's himself, it seems to be the mirror of Mr. Williams' concept of life, a dark mirror full of black and appalling images. For the characters who walk the Camino Real are lost in luxury and corruption. Mr. Williams's pessimism is frightening. The fantasies that boil through the central plaza of the play have a psychopathic bitterness to them. Still, this is what Mr. Williams thinks, and it has to be reckoned with. People who say that they do not understand the play may be unwilling to hear the terrible things it records about an odious no man's land between the desert and the sea. A sensitive, virtuoso writer Mr. Williams knows how to create an intelligible world. As theater, Camino Real is as eloquent and rhythmic as a piece of music. Now, Cat on a Hot Tin Roof was directed by Elia Kazan and starred Barbara Bel Geddes as Maggie, Ben Gazzara as Brick, Burl Ives as Big Daddy, Mildred Dunnock as Big Mama, Pat Hingle as Gooper, and Madeline Sherwood as May. It was a remarkable success that won Williams another Pulitzer Prize for drama. The film version that starred Elizabeth Taylor and Paul Newman was MGM's most successful release of 1958 and became the third highest grossing film of that year. But Williams, who later denied any affiliation with the screenplay, even though his name was in the credits, was incensed because it removed almost all of the homosexual themes and revised the third act section to include a lengthy scene of reconciliation between Brick and Big Daddy that does not occur in the play. Paul Newman also stated his disappointment with the adaptation. But we have to remember in Hollywood at this time, they had something that was called the Hays Code. Okay, it was named after some of the 1930s. It was a code of morality, what you could say, what you couldn't say. This extended, by the way, into television. That's why Lucy and Ricky always had, twin bed, things like that, right? Well, the Hays Code determined what was and wasn't decent in Hollywood films, and it limited Brick's portrayal of sexual desire for his college friend Skipper and diminished the original play's critique of homophobia and sexism. Williams so disliked the toned-down film adaptation of his play that he actually left the theater during its premiere and told people waiting in line to see the film, and I love this, quote, "This movie will set the industry back 50 years. Go home." Well, number 7 on our list is Suddenly Last Summer. It's a one-act play that centers on Catherine Holly, a young woman who, at the insistence of her wealthy aunt, is being evaluated by a psychiatric doctor to receive a lobotomy after witnessing the death of her cousin Sebastian Venable while traveling with him in Spain the previous summer. Hence the title, Suddenly Last Summer. And you, of course, recognize the lobotomy theme from William's real life, right, with his sister Rose. Acted primarily through soliloquies by its main cast, this 90-minute, somewhat autobiographical play is dark and disturbing. Like many of Williams's dramas, this one also found its way to the silver screen in 1959, and it became a huge box office hit. It was directed by Joseph Mankiewicz. The screenplay was by Williams and by Gore Vidal, the great novelist. And it had an all-star cast, including Katharine Hepburn, Elizabeth Taylor, and Montgomery Clift. And both Hepburn and Taylor received Oscar nominations, and Taylor actually won the Golden Globe Award for Best Actress that year for this movie. Now, Sweet Bird of Youth is a 1959 play that tells the story of a gigolo and a drifter named Chance Wayne, who returns to his hometown as the companion of a faded movie star, Alexandra Delago, who's traveling incognito as a princess. He's using her to help him break into the movies. Both Chance and Alexandra represent the quest for the great American dream. Unfortunately, they are too unscrupulous in their quest to achieve any of their goals. The Broadway production was directed by Elia Kazan and starred Paul Newman and Geraldine Page. The production was nominated for 3 Tony Awards, including Best Actress for Page, and it ran for more than a year and 375 performances. In 1962, the feature film opened to excellent reviews and had Paul Newman and Geraldine Page reprising their Broadway roles. The rest of the cast included Shirley Knight, Ed Begley, and Mildred Dunnock. The film version earned 3 Academy Award nominations, all for acting, Geraldine Page for Best Actress, Shirley Knight for Best Supporting Actress, and Ed Begley for Best Supporting Actor. And he actually won that Academy Award, Best Supporting Actor. Page, however, did win the Golden Globe for Best Actress that year for Sweet Bird of Youth. At the end of the play version, everyone wants Chance to leave town, but he doesn't. And it's implied that he will be castrated by a mob. Now, the film toned down that final justice. Chance only suffers a broken nose during a fight, and he escapes town with his would-be new girlfriend, ironically named Heavenly Finley. Now, in 1961 came the last great success for Williams, The Night of the Iguana. Based on a 1948 short story published in Hard Candy, Williams created several shorter drafts before it arrived as the 3-act version that premiered on Broadway in 1961. The production ran for 316 performances and starred Patrick O'Neill as Reverend Shannon, 2-time Oscar winner Bette Davis as Maxine, and Margaret Leighton as Hannah. Davis left the production after 4 months and was replaced by Shelley Winters. The play was nominated for a Tony Award for Best Play, and Leighton, as Hannah, won the Tony Award for Best Actress in a Play. Once again, in 1964, Williams found his work transformed into a highly successful Hollywood film. Directed by John Huston, it starred Richard Burton, Ava Gardner, Deborah Kerr, and Sue Lyon. The film won the 1964 Academy Award for Best Costume Design and was nominated for the Academy Awards for Best Art Direction and Best Cinematography. Actress Grayson Hall received both Academy Award and Golden Globe nominations for Best Supporting Actress, and Cyril Delevanti received Golden Globe nominations for Best Supporting Actor. In addition to Delevante's nomination as the Golden Globes, Ava Gardner also received a Best Actress in a Motion Picture Drama nomination. Both the picture and its director, John Huston, likewise received Golden Globe nominations. Well, all of this proved to be the last hurrah for Williams, who continued to write rather prolifically for the next 20 years, but who, in his lifetime, never again received the accolades of his early and middle period. There was, however, as we said before, one small exception, and that was a burst of a play called Small Craft Warnings that played off Broadway for 200 performances. It's a 2-act play by Williams, written in late 1971 and early 72. The play centers on a motley group of people gathered in a seedy coastal bar in Southern California, each commenting on the world and their lives. And here's a little bit of theater trivia. At one point in the original run, Williams himself took over the role of Doc in the play. He actually starred in his own play. Now, in his review in the New York Times, the venerable Clive Barnes quite rightly predicted, "This is not a major Tennessee Williams play, but it will certainly do until the next one comes along. And I suspect it may survive better than some of the much touted production of his salad years." Indeed, since its premiere, the play has been produced numerous times by professional and non-professional groups, often with prominent casts, and usually to great applause. Now, like Small Craft Warnings, late plays like Vieux Carré are receiving a much-needed re-examination and really are proving to be very worthy entries into the Williams canon. If you decided to read one of the late plays, I recommend this one. Referring to the French term for the French Quarter, it is a semi-autobiographical play set in New Orleans. Now, although he began writing the play shortly after moving to New Orleans from St. Louis in 1938, Williams didn't complete the play for nearly 40 years. Drawing on earlier writings, Williams wrote most of the play in 1976. In his review of the opening night, Clive Barnes in the New York Times said, Vieux Carré has a haunting nature. You leave the theater with the impression of having been told a secret, not necessarily a truth, but a secret. And it is unquestionably the murmurings of genius, not necessarily a major statement. Yet beneath those murmurings, through the meanderings, is an authentic voice of the 20th century theater. It is slight, but not negligible, which, considering so many dramas, is a pleasant reversal. Now, though the play ran only 5 performances on Broadway, it's been produced many times since, especially by regional theater groups. And I put a couple of, actually 3, right? One from New Orleans, one from London, and one in a touring group that did the play from 2009 to 2013 around the country. So Clive Barnes was kind of had prescience to realize that, okay, maybe this isn't Streetcar, but something, there's the murmurings of genius here. Most modern critics agree. Now, Williams obviously was a prolific dramatist, but he wrote over 70, in addition to the big ones on the Broadway stage, he also wrote 70 one-act plays, most now available in the 8 major collections that you see over there on the right of your screen. Williams once said, the peak of my virtuosity was in the one-act plays, some of which are like firecrackers on a rope. Well, of those so-called firecrackers, 27 wagons full of cotton, a Mississippi Delta comedy with dark overtones, is probably the one most often produced. But there are other gems, including the 2-character drama, The Magic Tower, the dark comedy, and I love this title, I Never Get Dressed Till After Dark on Sundays, the hysterical Gothic comedy, Some Problems for the Moose Lodge, and a very disturbing play about the last day of English novelist D.H. Lawrence called I Rise in Flame, Cried the Phoenix. Now, Williams also wrote 2 novels, The Roman Spring of Mrs. Stone in 1950, and Moïse and the World of Reason in 1975. For most critics, and I think I agree with this, Roman Spring is clearly the better of the 2, though Moïse, about a young, gay, black figure skater, has had some reconsideration in recent years. The novel Roman Spring, well reviewed when it first appeared, had a second life as a movie in 1961 with Vivien Leigh in her second to last film role. Though The Roman Spring received mixed reviews, the movie version, it did earn Lotte Lenya an Oscar nomination for Best Supporting Actress. So if you want to read a novel rather than a play, I really do recommend The Roman Spring of Mrs. Stone. It's really quite good. Now, we've already spoken about this, but, short stories, they're really a treat. He published 4 collections in his lifetime, with the first 2, One Arm and Other Stories and Hard Candy, often considered the best. What makes these narratives so fascinating is that you could explore some of the stories that would eventually become plays. The Night of the Iguana, The Glass Menagerie, Cat on a Hot Tin Roof, and A Streetcar Named Desire all saw their first light as short stories. But other standalone stories like Happy August 10th and Tent Worms, to name just 2, are superb pieces, written in Williams' typical Southern drawl style. The writing is sly and incisive. I recommend Collected Stories, that edition from 1985, edited by Gore Vidal, and because it presents 49 of the best of the stories and in chronological order. Now, for those interested in exploring the poetry of Tennessee Williams, I suggest the 2002 Collected Poems, edited by Nicholas Molchavkis and David Rossell, which gives the reader both previously unpublished poems as well as those from his two collections, In the Winter of Cities from 1956 and Androgyne Mon Amour from 1977. Now, let's be honest, Williams is not a major American poet. Indeed, he's usually relegated in anthologies to that dubious title, minor poet. But what he does present us is a variation of the deeply poetic language that he often uses in his plays. Now, another genre that Williams explored, and we've touched on this, was the screenplay. After some tenuous work with MGM in the 1940s, he helped to create the screenplays for a number of settings of his plays, including a somewhat expanded version of the Glass Menagerie that he co-wrote with Peter Bernays in 1950 that starred Kirk Douglas, Jane Wyman, Gertrude Lawrence, and George Kennedy. Less fortunate, we've already spoken about this, he was involved in the 1958 version of Cat on a Hot Tin Roof. And as we've already noted, he so hated the cuts and changes that the director and co-writer Richard Brooks made to his play and script that he stormed out of the premiere halfway through the film. One of his final screen efforts was his adaptation of the unsuccessful play, The Milk Train Doesn't Stop Here Anymore. He called it Boom, and it starred Richard Burton and Elizabeth Taylor. And it was probably one of the greatest box office bombs of 1968. The play was referred to as, quote, a pointless, pompous nightmare by Newsweek, an ordeal in tedium by the Hollywood Reporter, outright junk by the Saturday Review, and the Los Angeles Herald Examiner asked, quote, why was Boom ever filmed in the first place, unquote. On the other side of the coin, Williams received Oscar nominations for his screenplay for Streetcar in 1952 and his greatest film success, Baby Doll, in 1957. Now, I'm not saying those years wrong. Remember, the film comes out in 51, but the Oscars are always the following year. So the Oscar would be a nomination in 52. Baby Doll would be for 57. And that play, the Baby Doll, was a adaptation of his play 27 Wagons Full of Cotton. You know, even by today's standards, Baby Doll is a trailblazing venture into cinematic erotica, with Carol Baker winning a well-deserved Golden Globe Award and an Oscar nomination for her sultry performance. And you see her sprawled out there on the divan on your screen there. It's quite the movie. I recommend it. It's quite something. Still a little shocking today. And finally, yes, we come to the memoirs. Published in 1975, this is certainly not a standard chronological autobiography. No, this is a tell-all, not so much about other people, although he lets us know a few things about his theater friends, for example. No, rather, this is to paraphrase a popular movie title, all about Tennessee, instead of all about Eve. This is all about Tennessee. And we are the George Sanders character, Addison DeWitt from All About Eve, observing the spectacle. Probably the best critique of the memoirs comes from the New York Times venerable literary critic, Christopher Lehman Haupt. Here is the voice's gossipiness along with its lyricism. Here is its bitchiness as well as its tenacious devotion to art. Here is its fear of aging and death, its compulsive flight from loneliness, its yearning after permanent love. In short, here is the voice that has suffused our theatrical landscape for 3 decades now. The voice that is spoken through hundreds of memorable characters that inhabit our imaginations. Of course, we may not always care for the owner of that voice particularly. We may grow weary of his incessant search for young men who gratify his sexual urges, and we may be troubled at times by a certain callousness he betrays. Call him whatever you will, poet, madman, aging crocodile. Tennessee Williams is simply unique. There's really nothing left to do but read these memoirs with amusement and dismay, curiosity and disgust, laughter and pity. Now, as a quick postscript, I want to recommend a fine docudrama from 2020 called Truman and Tennessee, an intimate conversation. It stars Jim Parsons, whom many people know as Sheldon on the hit TV show The Big Bang Theory, and Zachary Quinto, whom you may know as Siler from the show Heroes, as Mr. Spock in the reboot of Star Trek, and currently as Dr. Oliver Wolf in the medical drama titled Brilliant Minds. Parsons plays Capote, and Quinto is Williams. And it truly explores the lives of two men who were both dear friends and pungent rivals, who were in many ways changed the landscape of American literature. The film is available on DVD and from streaming services like Amazon Prime, Apple Plus, and YouTube. And again, just to get our chronology here, they were contemporaries. Williams is born in 1911. Capote is born in 1924. Yet they both die in the 1980s, and they both die basically from drug and alcohol addiction. Both had great success in their early careers, and both had very floundering final decades. So there's a lot of parallel going on between these two. And they did know each other, and they were, I guess, what we would call today frenemies. They both admired each other's works, and yet they were very jealous of each other and their great successes. Well, there you have it. A brief look at the life and work of Tennessee Williams. Remember, for a deeper dive, please visit my website, makingwings.net, and go to deeper dive number 79. Now, before we talk about next month's program, let's hear from you. What are your thoughts and ideas?